I had the honor of interviewing Lloyd Evans from the John Cedars channel the other day, a fellow ex-Jehovah's Witness on the forefront of the battle against the Watchtower Society. I've actually seen every one of his videos. I watched them before I even started YouTube, as far as I can remember, so I can't express how honored I really am to have him on my channel. Thanks, Lloyd, for coming on, and for having me on your channel the other day. Okay, let's get into it. I have Lloyd Evans from the John Cedars channel here. Thank you for coming, Lloyd. I appreciate it.
It's a massive honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I have had you on before. It's been a while. So I figured what we'd do is we'd start from scratch and we would get your backgrounds. Can you tell me when you started with your activism?
I didn't document the date that I started kind of engaging on forums or even writing blog articles, but I did set up JW Survey in October 2011. So that's kind of my official date for when I first started. Yeah.
Interesting. So JW Survey. Can you tell me like what other activist stuff you have going on outside of YouTube? So you've got JW Survey, and what else is there?
So I've got 2 books out on Amazon, The Reluctant Apostate and How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses. I have just started a new website called The Reluctant Apostate. I think it's reluctantapostate.co, which is basically just for me, just to document my work. And I think that's about it. It's mostly that and JW Survey.
Yeah, I actually, the last time we did an interview, I remember I had your book sitting here with me. I don't have it sitting next to me this time. It's on a bookshelf over there. But yeah, I do have a copy of that. It's definitely worth a buy. Anyways, so yeah, why don't we start from the beginning? Do you want to tell me, like, what was your history with it? Did you, were you born into it? Were your parents born into it? Do you have different generations of family members? What's the story behind that?
So I'm 3rd generation on my dad's side. His mother was kind of coerced into joining after she lost both of her parents in fairly quick succession, and there was a knock at the door, which I've traced back to the year 1953 based on some notes that I have from the family. So that's when Watchtower made landfall in my family. And my dad was raised as a witness. And on my mother's side, her parents weren't witnesses. She was the one through whom the religion entered the family on her side. But she also had quite a tragic life leading up to the point where she decided to get baptized. So it was almost inevitable that I was going to get raised as a witness, which is what happened. And I don't think my parents were the strictest parents ever, but they certainly took it very seriously, and they raised me to take it seriously.
That's fascinating. So correct me if I'm wrong here, because I've seen your videos, but it's kind of been broken up. But from what I understand, your family wasn't terribly strict with your social life and things like that, right?
They were and they weren't. I think that they realized fairly early on that me and my sister weren't necessarily doing everything we could to go to the wrong kind of parties or anything. I think me and my sister were relatively well behaved for most kids our age, or for most Jehovah's Witness kids our age. So there wasn't too much of a panic with my parents. Oh no, they're going to get in with the wrong crowd. They kind of knew that we took our belief seriously, and that we weren't necessarily going to go to raves or parties with booze, even though we knew, we had kind of friends who could have connected us with that side of things, but we weren't really so interested in that. And so our parents were quite relaxed, I think, on that side of things.
Really fascinating. So, what was it like growing up as a teenager in your life, in your family? What were your teen years like?
My teenage years were an absolute nightmare. But I think that was largely to do with the fact that I was a witness and believed in, for example, preaching when I went to school. You're always going to have a hard time. It's bad enough that you have these beliefs that everyone around you deserves to die if Armageddon comes tomorrow. It's even worse if you're convinced that you need to remind them of that or bear some responsibility for their souls if you don't remind them of that. So I had a terrible time in school and was bullied mercilessly. I was also into science fiction, which didn't help. So I wasn't one of the cool kids, and I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to sports. So it wasn't until all of the other teenagers my age were losing interest in football and getting interested in girls that I started getting interested in football and buying magazines. I mean soccer, obviously. I'm buying magazines about my favourite football team, which was Manchester United. And I can remember I'd buy these magazines religiously every month because I guess it was my way of engaging with something that wasn't JW related. Kind of subconsciously, this was my outlet. And I'll never forget, I remembered this recently. My mum once said to me, "You know what your dad said, Lloyd?" And I said, "No, what did he say?" She said, "He came home and he saw you reading one of your Man United magazines. And he said, it would have been so nice if I could instead come home and see him reading The Watchtower." So even that little pleasure, that innocent pleasure, was apparently failing to meet my parents' expectations.
You can never win with this stuff, can you?
No.
You know what's funny is I knew that in Europe they called soccer football, but I was not connecting the dots there. So I'm glad that you clarified, especially for the audience. But so tell me, like, when did you become a ministerial servant? What was the process of your spiritual growth, quote unquote, if you could call it that?
So my parents were, unlike most other witness parents, they allowed me to go to college. They, in fact, encouraged it because they argued that the best thing would be if I could be a pioneer. And they wanted me to be, rather than just scraping by as a pioneer, they wanted me to be able to earn a comfortable living and do part-time work that would enable me to pioneer. So they reasoned that in order to do that, I should be as well educated as possible. So they enrolled me in a 2-year course. It was actually an art college course. But while I was doing that, I was associating with my witness friends. And during the day of the week when I had a bit of flexibility with my college schedule, I was actually going out preaching, believe it or not, with these friends of mine who I was really close to, and they were all pioneers. So that by the time my 2-year stint was coming to an end, I was already convinced I wanted to leave behind higher education against the recommendations of my tutors and become a pioneer. And it was on it was around my 19th birthday that I'm pretty sure it was a simultaneous announcement of Lloyd Evans is a regular pioneer and Lloyd Evans is a ministerial servant, because I'd also been doing my very best kind of behind the scenes, supporting maintenance projects, doing what I could in the congregation, and my elders made me a servant as well.
So you become a ministerial servant, and what age was that again?
Just turned 19.
Just turned 19, okay.
Yeah.
And when did you become an elder?
That wasn't for another 9 years. So I was in a congregation where there were lots of elders. I think at one point there were 18 elders while I was there. So I constantly had this feeling of not necessarily being used enough and not having many opportunities to show what I could do. And I expressed some of these frustrations to my circuit overseer around the time that I was 24. And the solution that was reached was that I would be assigned to a neighboring congregation where they had only, I think, 3 elders at the time. So I had an official assignment, which I was over the moon about. And I'd also simultaneously been applying for ministerial training school right from the point where I was old enough to. I was filling in the forms at the Circuit Assembly. And so they assigned me to this new congregation when I was 24. And I think within a year, I got the letter through saying that I had been accepted for ministerial training school. So I did that when I was 25. And then I think it was when I was 28 that they told me that I'd been appointed an elder.
As I'm sure you know, a pretty big segment of my audience isn't actually Jehovah's Witness. So would you mind describing what ministerial training school is exactly?
Sure. So ministerial training school, it's actually changed significantly since I was involved. It used to be kind of a men's only school for training, especially young witness men, although there were some older ones who were invited, basically training them to be of more use to Watchtower, with the idea that they could be assigned by Watchtower to any congregation and they would immediately know what to do and how to maybe set up a new congregation or how to help a congregation where there was a need. They've since changed the model for ministerial training school to allow couples to go, and I think some sisters are allowed to go as well now, and they now call it the School for Kingdom Evangelizers. So it's different now than when I was there. But when I was a witness, it was pretty much one of the biggest things a young witness male could aspire to. And I was over the moon when they accepted me, and it was a 2-month course where you go expecting to kind of receive this religious enlightenment that's going to kind of lift you and, oh, now I'm going to understand everything. But actually, it wasn't quite like that. We just studied Watchtower materials that were basically available to everyone. And the main thing that I enjoyed about it was just being with other young guys who I got on with.
To tell you the truth, I didn't actually know what ministerial training school was either. Of course, like I told you, I wasn't really, I wasn't heavily in the religion. So I got baptized and I was fully devoted to it, of course, but I didn't get, I left when I was 18. So I didn't really get past it that much. But I remember when I was in it, they had this little red book, and it was it was the ministerial something, and I guess they don't do that anymore.
Oh, the Theocratic Ministry School guidebook.
That's it.
Yeah, that became a large red book, and now it's basically been discontinued. Or they've changed it. They've replaced it with a much. I think that's it. As of the latest annual meeting, they've replaced it with a brochure, because there's basically nothing left now of the Theocratic Ministry School. And I actually think that's one of the sad things, is that the religion that you and I remember, we couldn't go back to it even if we wanted to, because the Theocratic Ministry School was basically the only thing that we got that gave us transferable skills. And even that was only available to us because we were guys. It wasn't really something that could benefit you so much if you were a woman. But nevertheless, here's something where it's teaching us to be better speakers. And now there's basically nothing left of it. It's just if you're a guy, you basically now have the opportunity to read Bible verses for 5 minutes at the meeting. And that's the only assignment that you can aspire to, unless you're a ministerial servant.
That's a real shame to me, because I remember learning an awful lot from that book. I didn't always study my magazines. I didn't always read the books ahead of time and things like that. Usually I tried to, but that book was just underlined. I mean, it was falling apart practically, because I felt like I learned some transferable skills from that, public speaking and things like that. Now, I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. I was wondering, what do you think is the most harmful practice undertaken by Jehovah's Witnesses?
That's hard when you phrase it like that. I guess it has to be the child sex abuse policies, because the worst thing that can happen, or one of the worst things that can happen to a human being, apart from being killed or mutilated in some way, is to be sexually assaulted as a child. And you have these policies that create an environment where it's very easy, if you're a sexual predator, to bend the rules so that you can not just violate one child, but kind of move on to the next and to the next, the way the rules have been set up. So probably in terms of harm, I would go for that one first. But usually when asked a question similar to that, if I'm asked which policy do you urgently think needs changing, I usually go for shunning, because I think that if they reverse the shunning teaching, well, first of all, shunning and child abuse are kind of linked in a way, because if a sex abuse victim decides to leave the organization due to what's happened to them, they then have this double pain of having their family weaponized against them. That's one thing. The other thing is that the shunning actually makes it impossible for people to vote with their feet. So that if you are an ordinary Jehovah's Witness who comes to learn about the sex abuse issues, there's no way that you can say, I don't like this, and if you don't change it, I'm going to leave. Because Watchtower would say to you, well, you can try, but we have our own things in mind, and we're going to turn your family against you if you do that. So it's a very vicious policy that creates essentially a captive organization.
Right. Sure. I can get on board with that. I think I'd probably agree with all of that. After leaving the witnesses, is there any positive that you were able to take away from your experience with them?
I actually wouldn't change anything that's happened to me. And I've mentioned this before, and I don't expect all ex-witnesses to have this attitude. I can fully understand the majority of ex-witnesses wishing that they had never had anything to do with the organization. And, you know, if they had the chance, they would kind of talk themselves out of it. If they could kind of go back in time and reason with themselves, I wouldn't change a thing, purely because in my own case, and I think this is true with you as well, it's put us in a situation where we can do something that will make the world a better place. By having this experience, it's basically put a fire in our bellies, and it's given us a knowledge of something that we probably wouldn't have been asked about otherwise. That by talking about it and explaining it and raising awareness, we're actually, in a way, kind of doing our little bit to make things better for the next generations to follow. So in my own case, I wouldn't change anything, but I fully sympathize with those who would.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. Something I've noticed is we are who we are as a result of our past. So
exactly, yeah.
I think that probably most people who have been through this wouldn't change their past, but we're doing this so that others don't have to go through it in the first place, I would say. That's my goal with it.
Yeah, we wouldn't be the same person if it weren't for the fact that we were JWs. And to an extent, that's true of any ex-witness. Being in that religion changes who you are as a person, and having the courage and the bravery and the honesty to break out is also a life-changing experience. So if you hadn't been through all that, you quite simply would be a different person. So I'm kind of at peace with who I am and the decisions I've made in life, and we're all just doing our best, aren't we?
Yep, that's right. So I had another question here for you. Have you ever had somebody who you knew when you were in it tell you that they left because of you?
Oh, not enough. Not enough. There's maybe 10. Well, no, there's maybe around 10 people who I'm reconnected with, who knew me when I was a witness, and they're not necessarily awake because of me. It's just that we've reconnected since then. Of those, like, there's maybe one or two who've said that my work has been helpful for them. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's woken them up, because sometimes, for example, you can be disfellowshipped and you can carry on believing that you're unworthy, that you're worthy of annihilation at Armageddon, and you can hold on to all of that fear and paranoia. So maybe my work has helped them realize that actually you are a good person, and you don't deserve to be destroyed at Armageddon. And it's maybe helped them move on in some way. I don't know. But considering that I knew hundreds of people when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I had quite a big social life. Excuse me. Considering how many people I knew, it's kind of a source of disappointment that there aren't more people who I knew who have reached out to me.
Right. I don't think I've personally ever had anybody tell me that they left because of the things that I've said, but I have had people tell me they left because of you. I've actually had a lot of old friends from my congregation and things tell me that they knew your videos. So that's something to be proud of, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm delighted to hear it. Although, as I say to people who say that to me, my videos would have been useless if they hadn't had the bravery and honesty to challenge their beliefs. So most of the credit goes to them.
That is very true. It's a difficult thing you have to be at a certain state in your emotional growth to be willing to watch these videos, right?
If every Jehovah's Witness was perfectly fine with watching my videos or your videos, we wouldn't be having this conversation, quite frankly.
Right.
So yeah,
that's another policy that I'd like to see changed, is not just the shunning bit, but also the no looking at oppositional material. That if we could make it so that people could view these videos, that would be a lot better, I think.
Although again, that would be a suicidal policy for Watchtower to implement, because once you start learning, I mean, we were talking about Beth Sarim when I interviewed you, and there's one example from Watchtower history of where you learn about it, and it quickly becomes apparent that in no way can we talk about Watchtower as being God's organization if they once had such ridiculous ideas. So I can kind of understand them warning people away from apostate content. What I have a real issue with is them turning people's families against those who decide to leave.
That's very true. The shunning thing, that's a more realistic, I guess you could say, or more realistic hope. I don't think it's completely out of the question. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but yeah.
Anything's possible. But possibility and probability are two different things. Go. And I like to talk in terms of reform, just to show that, I'm not demonizing the organization, or I'm at least giving them the benefits of the doubt. But inwardly, I personally can't see it happening ever. But I still, again, like to extend an olive branch wherever I can and say, well, here's what you could do if you want to be more reasonable. Yeah,
sure. So we're not fighting to just destroy the whole thing necessarily. Yeah. We're okay with reform.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm with you. So let me ask you this then. How did you get started with activism? Exactly. Like you left the religion. I guess you disassociated. Where was the leap between just not wanting anything to do with the witnesses anymore and just outright becoming an activist?
I guess it all started with an email to Paul Grundy, who ex-witnesses will know as the man behind JW Facts, because I sent him an email and he didn't reply, and I now understand exactly why that was, because when you do the work that we do, it's impossible to keep up with all of the messages that you get. But I persisted and I sent another email, and he replied to the second email. And so we got a little bit of an exchange going, and I drew his attention to something that I found interesting, that was to do with a convention in Watchtower's past. It was the Cedar Point Convention. I think it was 1922. because it had been portrayed in one of Watchtower's videos in a very disingenuous way, where at the actual event there had been American flags hanging everywhere, which, you know, for Jehovah's Witnesses today would be a complete no-no. And in the digital reenactment, there were no American flags, and I found that very disingenuous. So I emailed Paul Grundy about this with screenshots and what have you, and said maybe you find this interesting and maybe you'd want to include this on your website. And he replied and said, well, I probably won't put it on my website, but I'll probably make a post about it on this forum. So I said, oh, that's fine. So he did this post and sent me the link. And I as soon as I clicked on the link and saw people talking about this subject, which I was interested in, I thought, I've got to get involved in this. So I thought, what name can I choose? And because they were talking about the Cedar Point, Ohio convention, I chose the name Cedars. And in setting up the email, I had to choose a first name. So I thought, John, I guess. So John Cedars was born. And that was my first ever involvement in activism, was kind of weighing in on this discussion thread. And from there, it went to kind of multiple discussion threads and me writing for someone else's website and eventually writing for my own website and then starting to make YouTube videos. And it just kind of snowballed from there, really.
Did you ever wonder, like, let me tell you this story. When I was little, from what I understand, I was at a convention, and I'm talking like, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something. My mom was telling me that she was sitting there listening to the speaker, and some apostate stood up and started yelling apostate lies at everybody, and the elders had to circle the guy and lock arms and walk him out of the building, basically. This is the story my mom's telling me. So I'm wondering, like, what is it like to meet some of these people who you, for lack of a better term, feared when you were on the inside? I mean, JW Facts, I actually knew about that website when I was inside and knew that the guy running it was just a mentally diseased apostate, you know? So what's it like to meet these people and realize that they're not bad people?
I haven't met Paul in person yet. I'm hoping to have that privilege next year. I'm hoping to go to Australia and finally meet him in person. We have had conversations over Skype, and I've interviewed him for my channel. One thing that I was very interested in when I first set foot on JW Facts, before I'd even looked at any of the information, I wanted to know who was behind it. And I think Paul had, or maybe still has, a page where he talks a little bit about his own story. And on that page, there was a picture of him with his son. And I remember just seeing that picture of him with his son and thinking, I'm sorry, but this doesn't look like an apostate to me. This looks like a perfectly normal family man. And I'm interested to hear what he has to say. So I had that same stereotype in my head going into the process, and I was, albeit purely through looking at appearances, I was able to slightly dismantle that and hear him out. But I think that undoubtedly some of those experiences are based on actual ex-witnesses who go to events and disrupt them and act in a confrontational, antisocial way. And you and I have our opinions on whether that kind of behavior is effective or not.
Right. I don't think it's effective. Personally.
It isn't.
Right.
However, I think that most of the cases where you have people shouting at conventions are not necessarily ex-witnesses. I think when I think back in my history, probably most people who were stood outside conventions with signs were just born-again Christians who had no background with the witnesses and were just looking for easy pickings. But in your head, you think of them as being apostates, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's certainly nothing to be gained from perpetuating that stereotype. And you and I know that if you're trying to convince someone, if you're trying to persuade someone, you do it with logic and you do it with them asking you questions. You need them to be engaged in the process. You don't change someone's mind by just kind of taking this whole bunch of knowledge and dumping it in their laps. They have to be engaged. It's a little bit like the movie Inception, where in order to influence their behavior, they have to actually go into the dreams and do so. It's that complicated. There's like an art to persuading people. And I'm a big admirer of the work of Anthony Magnabosco, who is involved in trying to figure out ways of conversationally changing people's minds and asking the right kinds of questions. Simply by shouting at people and being rude and screaming things like child sex abuse in their faces, that's not going to change minds, unfortunately. If it was, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right. I completely agree with you there. I actually did a video on Kingdom Hall crashing a while back and pointing out why when you do Kingdom Hall crashing, what you end up with is you're polarizing the people there. They either have to side with the person screaming in their face or the Watchtower Society. And once they side with the Watchtower Society, which is pretty much inevitable because you just came into their house and you are in their eyes offending, what happens is they lock into the ideas that the Watchtower Society perpetuates about apostates. They believe this whole, they're mentally diseased bit because that's what it looks like. That's what appears is happening. A mentally diseased person just walked in and is screaming at us. Yeah. So I definitely agree with you there. It's counterproductive. I think that it does more harm than good, and that we should be finding more productive ways to engage people like that.
Excuse the fact that I'm completely disrespecting your religious observance, and listen to what I have to say. It just doesn't work that way.
Exactly right. Okay, so on to another question here. If you could say one thing to all Jehovah's Witnesses, knowing that they would all hear it, everybody in the world, regardless of physical barriers, language barriers, or anything else, what would you want to say?
Care about what's true. Care about what's true enough to investigate objectively what your beliefs are. If your beliefs are the truth, then you should be able to subject them to maximum scrutiny, and they should come through that process of testing with your beliefs only having been strengthened, with your faith only having been strengthened. It should be a validating experience to say, what's the very worst argument that you can throw at me, and let me investigate it. And by the end of it, if your beliefs are true, your faith should be stronger than ever. If, on the other hand, you go through that process and find out that actually you've been lied to and exploited, then again you win, because you can do something about it. You can adjust your life accordingly. But either way, doing objective research is a win-win scenario, even if it leaves you with difficult decisions to make about what you are going to believe, how you're going to interact with your family, what your future relationships are going to be. Fine, but if you care enough about what's true, then you shouldn't fear putting your beliefs to the closest possible scrutiny, and that's all I would encourage you to do.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Okay, so every interview has to have a softball, so I got a softball question for you. I was wondering if you could tell me what your favorite dinosaur is.
We just watched the latest Jurassic World video the other night. And I think I'm warming to the velociraptors, actually. I was terrified of them in the first film, but they're slowly becoming the good guys. So,
right, okay, that's fair enough. I think they're pretty short, aren't they? They're about human-sized, or maybe even shorter.
Yeah, and there's some suggestion that they could have been far more feathered than they're portrayed in Jurassic Park, but they had to keep them featherless to be consistent with the first film. But yeah, I just find them fascinating. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. It's been a fascinating interview, and I will talk to you later on, okay?
Cheers, Telltale. Keep up the fantastic work.
You too. That's all I've got for you guys. Don't forget to follow both of us on social media. Subscribe to his channel, which you can find in the description of this video or in the card above, and check us both out on Patreon to support our work. Thanks for watching, guys.